It is September, by faith, 2nd. Yeah. Starting out with
Year
the
of our
fifth.
Lord.
So, last month we heard about the concept of epistemology. What a cool word, epistemology, that top word there. That's the branch of philosophy that has to do with what knowledge is, how we can know things, what it means to say that we know things. And today we're going to also just start out talking about another word that we don't usually hear in conversation, but which again is extremely important, and that is this word, teleology, which is when you explain something in terms of its function, purpose, or reason for being. And in fact, Aristotle talked about the cause, he talked about, I think it was 5 different causes, and one of the causes was, we think of something coming before, but the purpose or design of an item. So that's the, for example, the purpose of a knife is to cut. The purpose of a car or a truck is to transport people or things. And the purpose of an umbrella is to provide shelter from rain or sun and so on. Well, the reason teleology is so important is because teleological thinking, framing or understanding something, which could be anything, in terms of its function or purpose, is thought to play a role in the origins and certainly the maintenance of superstitious religions and of superstitions generally, supernatural belief, which is much of what we're going to be talking about today, and much of what we talk about a lot of times. First, one thing to talk about the purpose of knives or motor vehicles or umbrellas. It's quite another to say that the purpose of clouds is to give rain, or that the purpose of trees is to give shade to sit under or fruit to eat. Of course, clouds do provide rain, and depending on the tree, they may provide fruit or nuts as well as some shade to sit in. But the one has to do with the fact that some objects are deliberately constructed to serve a use, like knives, motor vehicles, umbrellas. And the other has to do with what uses that we see in or manage to put things to that have nothing to do with anyone's intentions but our own. But as we know, one of the most famous and certainly enduring and what people find most persuasive arguments for the existence of God is the argument from design, that all the things we see are here for purposes of God. And certainly those are the most popular of the theistic claims. It turns out that conspiracy theories also get their impetus from teleological thinking. People are apt to suppose that events that end up hurting or benefiting or being exploited by someone or some identified group of people were set in motion by those people or shadowy groups controlled by them. The difficulty here is that depending on the events in question, it can sometimes be partially true. More often things don't happen for a reason in this sense. Of course, sometimes the opposite occurs. Sometimes, perhaps a lot of times, politicians or political parties claim that their plans or efforts had helpful effects or even saved the day when that may be very far from the truth. So there's a lot of very interesting things that people have said about this trope that everything happens for a reason. And many wise people, if you go on the wonderful internet, you can find all kinds of interesting quotes about people kind of doing a riff on that because everything clearly does not happen for a reason. In fact, we give what happens a reason and do our best to make sense of things even when there's no sense to be made of them. So teleological thinking involves, and there's an article that John Goche sent me when I brought this subject up with him earlier this week. There's at least 3 problems, 3 logical fallacies with teleological thinking. One is it confuses cause and effect, making the future the cause of the past, as if raindrops and puddles on the ground were anticipated by the clouds that gave rise to them. Teleological thinking is also kind of like backward causation, teleological thinking, which was very popular for a long time. People thought nothing of this causes going forwards and backwards. It's also, of course, anthropomorphic, attributing human qualities like planning and purpose to non-human and even non-living things. And it confuses effects with human motivations. Just because, for example, someone like Bill Gates, he's very well thought of because of his charitable activities, but just because of that doesn't mean that the purpose of those activities and the reason he engages in them is so that he is well thought of. So teleological thinking is very, I don't know, that's kind of a busy slide if you can read it from back there. This is one of the important things that the agency detective device, part of teleological thinking. This way of approaching things is very deeply rooted in our minds, in every one of our minds. We can't get rid of it any more than you can change your knee from a hinge joint into a ball joint. Might be very useful if you could do it, but it ain't going to happen. So a common example of such attribution of agency to everything is think of one of our semi-human or even pre-human ancestors as they're out running around the grasslands, and suddenly there's a rustle in the grass or the bushes, and it might just be a sudden gust of wind. 99 times out of 100 is probably going to be. But if it is just the wind and the animal runs away frightened, there's not really a big downside. But if, on the other hand, it's not just the wind, if it's a predator and the animal does not run away, that animal will not survive to leave descendants who will be similarly dismissive of the rustle in the vegetation, even if, like I said, the rustle in the vegetation is 99 times out of 100 or 999 times out of 1,000 just a gust of wind. Research has shown that awareness of the intentionality and internal states of others, the core of teleological thinking, can be demonstrated in children beginning about 9 to 18 months of age. And by age 3 or 4, children can give accounts of others' behavior in terms of other people's beliefs and desires. So they just do this very naturally. They don't reliably distinguish between animate and inanimate others. By the way, that rustle in the grass thing, right, whether you run away or not, it bears an uncanny resemblance to Pascal's wager, doesn't it? Right? There's no downside to believing, so you should just believe, even if there's only a teeny tiny chance that non-believing will land you in hell. So I came across an interesting report by some Argentinian investigators, which is available online. Email me, I'll send you the link or even the article, that considers that teleological thinking is a serious obstacle, even for adults, in teaching, learning, and understanding many things, especially the process of natural selection as a driver for biological evolution. You've all seen this before. And of course, Teilhard de Chardin, the Catholic priest, and other people, many other people, looked at evolution as being goal-directed, right? The goal of evolution is to get here, right? Oh, wonderful, that's how God made us. When in fact, it was not directed, not something that you can understand by thinking teleologically. These authors of this article I'm talking about say in their conclusion that teleological thinking in relation to living beings is a fundamental characteristic of our psyche, as highlighted both by biology didactics and cognitive psychology. Teleological thinking is a characteristic of our cognitive apparatus that is neither possible nor desirable to eliminate. Educational work, therefore, should focus more on developing students' metacognitive capacities. Students should be capable of recognizing the teleological tendencies of their thinking and understand the limitations and dangers of this. So it's a lot like Freethought, right? We have to kind of monitor ourselves and understand how we're thinking. It's not enough to just think. You also have to have some sense of where your thinking is coming from and where it's going, almost like you're a third-party observer. Hey, come on and sit down. It's your first time here? Great, welcome. Come on, have a seat. See, David Collins straggled in too. And you? Somebody else here is new who's got pitfalls. I hear about your masters. So anyways, we can generalize this point. That is, it's not going to be possible to stop people, even ourselves. And not all the time, at least, from teleological thinking. That shouldn't be the goal. It's probably not even desirable to do this, since there's satisfaction in doing what we can to make sense of things, even when there's no sense to be made of them. What is possible, and certainly very desirable, is this metacognitive learning to recognize such thinking so its effects can be put in perspective and appropriately limited or discounted. And this fits with our Freethought project of distinguishing between the subjective and the objective, right? Personal, individual existence. So, for example, there's not really anything wrong with us feeling when something good happens, like, the universe loves me. That's great, right? Even though we know that's teleological thinking, that's not true in an objective sense. We just have to be careful not to suppose that the good luck can be substituted for good planning or taking reasonable precautions against the bad luck. And when bad things happen, we must also have the metacognitive ability to remind ourselves not to kind of wallow in feeling like, oh, the universe hates me. Instead, we have to realize the universe doesn't hate me. Bad things can and do happen to everyone, and I'm no exception. So what might I do next time that might avoid or reduce the chance of some bad thing happening? So I think you will see how such ideas relate to what our guest speakers today are going to be discussing. I think these ideas relate to a lot of things in our lives. Freethought, like the disciplines of science, doesn't come naturally. No one just falls into it. Rather, it's an outlook, a habit of mind, and a Weltanschauung, what a great word, a worldview, that requires some reflection and maturity. It even requires a certain kind of self-denial, a kind of self-denial that rejects our reflexive responses, however welcome and comfortable that may seem, in favor of doubt. It takes a little bit of effort sometimes, doubt. Wake up that doubting part of you. And then reason, thought, of course, patient consideration, and always a willingness to go beyond what you may previously have thought or believed. And that's what the Church of Freethought is about. A little intro remarks about what you're doing here at a Freethought church. So apply what we do, of course, especially to the subjective side of the human condition. I won't take up additional time talking about things that happened on September 2nd. I will just mention that this is the date in 1945. Merlin was there. Do you remember? Was there a big celebration and stuff?
I do.
On September 2nd was the Japanese surrender day. When the Japanese instrument of surrender was signed on board the battleship USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, ending World War II. Here's some shots from that. Anyone here have a birthday in September?
I have a birthday in 1945.
In September?
Wow.
1945. Is your birthday in September, Will?
No.
November. Somebody raised a hand back
You're
there.
right.
Yeah, I was born yesterday, September 1st, but many years.
This isn't cool, so now it's September 2nd. Not only is it Japanese Surrender Day, Victory over Japan Day, but you can go around saying, hey, I was born yesterday. Well, happy birthday a day late. Well, do you think you know what religion is? Well, no one really knows what religion is, that's the truth. American psychologist and philosopher William James said that religion is one's total reaction upon life. And that's kind of the way we look at religion as well. We have at times said that this here is our creed, or we just say it's what we aspire to. We can say it differently, of course, whatever we like. It's not set in stone like some other religions' creeds. It's fair to say that with every one of our church services, really, we just do, the whole service is just a restatement of what we do, what kinds of things we believe, especially the importance of doubt. We're a doubt-based religion. But let us know what you think of these summary statements, please. We put the most effort into our monthly service. It has to be something worth your coming to after all, but we have other things going on every month as well. We have game night every Friday, and on non-first Sundays of the month we have Salon, which now meets at the Embassy Suites DFW Airport North, over here next to the on Bass Pro Drive, next to that Cabela's. What's the other term for that? It's a big sporting goods. Bass Pro. Yeah. It's on Bass Pro Drive. So the hotel has a buffet breakfast. You have to go and pay for it at the front desk, because normally it's just for guests, kind of like here. But the buffet breakfast ends at 10:30, so we usually try to get there by about 10, so we can get coffee and all. This is all on the back page of the bulletin. If you lose yours, it's available also on the website. We can always do more, but it takes people and ideas, and especially their work, to put those ideas into action. So give this some thought. It could just be a one-time event. If you think we should try doing something, don't have to do it all the time. Put your free thinking into action. It pays in personal satisfaction, if not money. We especially need volunteers to assist Kit and Merlin with the Child Care Sunday School. That's pretty simple. Show them a good time, give them a sense of what it's like to be a free thinker, and I guess there's no kids today, so that often is the way it is, but if there are kids, you had quadruplets last time, wasn't it? Yeah, so we'll take care of quadruplets, small children last time. That was practice for something. We also want volunteers to participate with getting the AV equipment here, keeping it between our services. Taylor brought it today, and thank you so much, Taylor, who's in the back there. He's so modest, always sits in the back, who schlepped the things in. And Leonard is going to take it with him today, bring it next time. We'll have it where John Hendricks can pick it up. So just we need to be able to get these things around. Edwin Pegelow's gone today, and John Hendricks, that's why I have to do things a little bit differently. You're definitely going to be here for the October service, right?
Yes.
So our next service, as said, will be the first Sunday in October, the 7th. We're going to talk then about the New England witchcraft hysteria that took place in 1692. Certain people even today complain about witch hunts. But the Bible, the paragon of truth, I mean, who doesn't believe in that, says that there are witches. So it is worthwhile to have witch hunts. And not only that, but the witches have to be put to death. what did the English colonists, what did the colonists in New England think about that in 1692? So next time we're gonna talk about that. So come on next month, it's not one you wanna miss. Bring anybody else, everyone and anyone else that you can. And then in November, the month after, we're gonna have a really special service with Professor Christella Manning, who's going to come from Sacred Heart University. Oh yes, she's an atheist. This is in your e-newsletter, if you got that. If you didn't get it, make sure you get your email address to us so we can add you to the list. She's written some books. Will, why don't you just come and hold up the book and tell us about what Christella's coming to town for. And we're gonna help defray some of her expenses, so we'd like to ask for your help with that too. Will?
About 6 weeks ago, Tim emailed me and forwarded me an email that he had received. It was from Dr. Crystal J. Manning, who is a professor of the sociology of religion at Sacred Heart University right outside of New Haven, Connecticut. And she had written Tim saying that she was doing research and working on a book about how people like us that are age 70 or older think about end-of-life issues, suffering, dying, death, so on and so forth. And Tim sent me her email thinking that I might respond to her and talk to her. So I did. I got in touch with her, and she wanted to do what do you call it, a Skype interview with me. And the more we got talking, she said, "Well, I'd really like to talk to a lot more people in another part of the country." She said, "Everybody I have talked to so far and interviewed so far has been in the Northeast." And I said, "Well, how would you like to come to Texas and meet with our group and interview some people and so on and so forth?" So I called Tim on the phone and said, "Tim, I've got an idea. Let's invite Dr. Manning to come to Dallas." And we put that together. She's going to come November 2, 3, and 4. I think she's going to be here 3 days. And she's going to conduct interviews with people 70 or older about what they think about end-of-life matters and issues. And then she's going to be our principal speaker at this service on the first Sunday in November. She's the author of 3 books. This is her latest book, published in 2015, called Losing Our Religion. And it's about the nuns, N-O-N-E. In other words, she talks about the huge and dramatic increase of the number of nuns in the U.S. over the last 10 or 15 years. According to what she says in here, it's up to about 20%. Anyway, all of her work is being funded by the Templeton Foundation. Y'all ever heard of Sir John Templeton? And, well, Sir John Templeton had a huge investment company called Templeton Funds. And then they merged 10 or 15 years ago with Franklin Funds, and now it's called Franklin Templeton Funds. But anyway, Sir John is dead now, but he was a very, very wealthy man. And he set up the Templeton Foundation, and they're probably the largest contributors to study about things religious than anybody else on the planet. And every year they have the Templeton Prize in Religion, and it's just like winning the Nobel Prize. Whoever gets the Templeton Prize in Religion gets over $1 million from the Templeton Foundation, in that given year. But anyway, the Templeton Foundation is going to help pay her way here, but they're not going to cover all of it. I figure it's going to take about $1,000 from us. It's just a round-trip plane ticket at $900, and it's going to take about $1,000 from us to help defray some of her expenses. So we hope that those of you that can will be generous and will make a contribution to that effort and help us, pay for Dr. Templeton's being with us. And we need about 6, 8, or 10 people that will be willing to be
round plane
interviewed.
ticket, $900. How is it not round plane ticket, $900? Like, I've seen plane tickets go for much less than
Well,
that.
I got online myself and looked it up. There are only a couple of airlines that fly into New Haven. One of them's American and one of them is United. And for the dates that she'll be coming, I found out that the lowest cost coach ticket was about $450 each way. And I myself did that
I
research.
need to go to another town to do parts.
Yeah. Well,
You could probably just drive to another
a
place.
lot of people do fly in that area, fly out of either New York or Boston. But, for some reason, she can't do that at this town. So, anyway, if you would be willing to make a contribution to this effort, Tim, tell them what to do.
Well, if you just make any kind of contribution in any amount, just designate that this is for Dr. Manning's visit in November. So you can do that through PayPal, and I believe you can attach a comment. The rainbow colored boxes, of course, that we have in the back for collecting donations. Just write on your check or attach write on your $100 bill, Dr. Manning, and we'll know that that's for that. And we have this month and next month to do that, so we'll be begging again next month. But this is going to be quite an interesting thing, and the fact that you can come speak to us as well. Will is actually helping to defray the cost because Dr. Manning's going to stay at his home, and that's where I guess the interview will take place as well. So she'll be staying at his home for a few days, and he's going to provide some good support for that. But she's definitely one of us, and she's doing some important work. I mean, to be putting out books like the one that Will held up, and of course, buy a book ahead of time to bring to service, I'm sure she'll sign it personally for you.
She says in this book that she's been an atheist since she was 16 years old. And how in the world she got hired by a Roman Catholic university to teach.
That's a good sign too, isn't it?
Yeah, religion is quite interesting.
Well, thank you, Will, and that's something to look forward to. If you want to toggle to your, this will allow you to move between the slides. Thank you.
We can do that.
He's the driver. So, Rex Burks and Owen Younger, they came and spoke to us, I believe, in March. They got to know each other and started working together from going around to local churches' Bible studies, the ones that said everyone invited. And they shared with us how they would engage these folks in conversation. They came again in July. Rex is an attorney. Owen flies airplanes. Rex has quite a lot of expertise in kind of legal ins and outs of church-state separation, and a lot of it rubbed off on Owen too, so they talked about that in July. So now they're back now to talk about answering the claims of Christianity. So please welcome them.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions, Owen, before we click forward. And this is something we've started asking. I usually get one or two, and it's absolutely okay because everyone's always welcome at our talks. Is there anyone in the room who currently identifies as a Christian of any kind? Okay, well, I didn't get any hands today, but it often is the case that we're speaking to a Freethought group and there's someone who's a spouse who's there with a pre-thinker. And so the reason I ask that question is because Owen and I will sometimes talk to groups of Christians and sometimes talk to groups of pre-thinkers. And we always want to make sure that our message doesn't change, right? I don't ever want there to be some secret tape where here's what they said to the Christians and here's what they said to the atheists. So we're not going to vary our message. If there were Christians, you'd be more than welcome. Everyone's welcome in our talks. The second question I have is, did anyone see, or show of hands if you watched any of the McCain Memorial yesterday that was on TV? Okay, a few of you. We're going to make reference to that in a little bit. Some interesting things.
Terrible violation of separation of church and state.
In what sense?
Well,
Do you think it was paid for by the government? Probably.
well, who knows? But I mean, he was a governmental figure, and most all of the events that have taken place over the past 4 or 5 days were highly religious and Christian in nature. And
A funeral, a funeral is a personal matter.
Yeah.
I don't think we can argue that was a government.
oh, I'm not saying this wrong.
Well, but it does have the effect of endorsing.
Okay, so the fact that the senator is a Christian is not an endorsement of Christianity. He died.
Well, and as a military veteran, I mean, the United States military pays for, the color guard and the pallbearers at veterans' funerals all over the country all the time. So
Have you ever seen one of those events happen in a synagogue, though, with rabbis doing the
No.
talks? No.
Do they not?
You won't. Okay.
A Jewish veteran who dies doesn't get military colors over his son.
Scientologists.
About Muslim that,
So
Muslim,
so this is not what we're going to talk about. But I will tell you, having attended many of these things, that you go to the National Cemetery here in Dallas, there's a veteran cemetery, and there are Stars of David, and there are other emblems out there, and some say atheist. And the fact that the overwhelming majority of people are in America, in America are Christians, and that therefore the overwhelming majority of the people who are senators or congressmen or veterans are Christians, it is absolutely intuitive that we are therefore going to see lots and lots of Christian funerals that have the trappings of state or of veterans, and that's not a violation of church. I don't agree. But
But I'd rather change mine.
I'd rather,
Yeah.
well, right.
Okay, so let's move on.
So answering the 5 claims. First things first. There we go.
Always a reminder,
Always a reminder.
you're standing on the wrong side.
One of us is a pilot, and the other is ridiculously tall.
There you go.
And I'm the one with the meter sheets on the other side. I'm Owen, he's Rex. Okay, so the project, first time we were here. Normally, this presentation that you're seeing today is the second presentation that we give to a group. We intervened with the church and state thing.
Because it was 4th of July.
Right. So,
But we told you a little bit about how we spent several years visiting Sunday school classes, talking to believers, really gathering intelligence from the spectrum of Christian denominational belief, from the most fundamentalist to the most liberal Christians. And that is really the source material for much of what we're going to talk about today. But we're not going to repeat that presentation, but just as a reminder, that's where we came from.
just to underscore this, Rex and I, and the project is still going on. I don't know that we'll ever stop at this point. We go to church a couple of times a month, different churches, we go to Bible study groups, and we talk to them, we tell them, within, 10 or 15 minutes of being there, we're atheists. We read this book differently than you do. Tell me why you read it the way you do, and we have conversations about it. And it frequently comes out in the course of those conversations that Rex and I are far, far more informed about the Bible than the people who are in the Bible study club. Right. So 5 central Christian claims. And when we say claim, we mean that if you ask someone why they're a Christian, this is the kind of answer you're going to get. And it runs across a spectrum, right? The most fundamentalist people, when you ask why they're a Christian, are going to say, God is real and miracles are real.
Right, so the first point here is all the magic stuff, right?
Right.
Like, everything about the supernatural, God, angels, Satan, miracles, walking on water, raising from the dead, all the magic stuff is what they'll throw at you first, right? That's the main reason that someone would claim to be a Christian. The second reason is really, when pressed for evidence on the first, they'll come up with the second one, the Bible is a divine perfect book. We hear that a lot. Different types of Christian will praise that inspiration in different ways and the historicity in different ways, but something about the Bible being special. The third thing is that the plan itself is beautiful. We love it. It's a great plan.
The greatest story ever told, Jesus died for me, etc.
Christianity is good for humanity, and then finally, life without Christianity would be meaningless and hopeless. So notice that the first 2 are truth claims, and the last 3 are more subjective evaluations. But these are all things that Christians, in one way or another, will say to us over and over again. So we're gonna do a deep dive into these 5.
I am a Christian because of X.
One of these, yeah.
Or maybe 7. So we actually see this differently. Rex and I are both former fundamentalists. We're not just former Christians, we're former fundamentalists.
We believed it all.
I believed it hook, line, and sinker, and the letting go of that was excruciatingly painful. The counterpoint to God is real and miracles are real is...
Well, obviously, there's 0 good evidence for God or miracles. There's just no reason to believe that.
Yeah, but I have a divine, perfect, special book.
Well, your Bible is obviously man-made.
But Jesus is the greatest story ever told.
Well, God's plans are often grotesque, arbitrary, and offensive.
No. Christianity is good for humanity.
Christianity is an extreme obstacle to human flourishing.
But life without Christianity would be meaningless.
You're right. No. A life of reason and free thought can be meaningful and beautiful.
How many of you have completely meaningless lives? That's funny.
On show of hands.
How many of you used to be Christians? Almost everybody. Okay.
All right.
So claim number 1, God is real and miracles are real. There is 0 good evidence for God and miracle.
Prove it,
I'm sorry?
prove it.
It's not up to me to prove it.
Oh, well, let's talk about that.
You guys notice the apologetic sort of parlor trick right there,
Right,
inverting the burden of proof.
Right, who's making the fun?
So-
All right, which is where we bring in Carl Sagan. You all remember Carl Sagan. He's a great man. He often said over and over again, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And if you tell me that there's an invisible man that's running the universe, and you tell me that a dead person is still alive in the heavens, these are extraordinary claims, right? You need to muster some evidence for those claims. But Christians will try to invert that burden of proof and say, well, you can't prove Jesus didn't rise from the grave, and you can't prove my grandma's not in heaven. But what they're doing is inverting that burden of proof, right? They're the ones making the extraordinary claim. When we make claims about the natural world, those aren't extraordinary claims, right? We observe a mammal dies and decomposes. That's not an extraordinary claim. That's what the evidence shows. If you claim that that animal has a soul that is now in heaven, that's an extraordinary claim. Because it differs from our observation.
So apologists will do some very interesting things to try and defend this supernatural position. And what they'll say is, here is something very mundane that happened in the world, and I will try and convert that into evidence that my supernatural story is real. And here's an example.
Have you seen this literature that Josh McDowell, Lee Strobel, do you know these guys? One of the fascinating things when we talk to Christians, and particularly in fundamentalist Baptist churches and Pentecostal churches, Seventh-day Adventist churches, they want to believe all the stuff in the Bible. They want to believe the literal account in Genesis and the Exodus and the flood and all of these things. And, of course, all the miracles around Jesus and the resurrection as well. And so what they'll do is they'll say, well, the smart people have it figured out. They buy these books and they put them on the shelf. And when you press them, a lot of these people haven't even read these books. Like, it's just enough to know my faith is rational because these smart people, they must be smart, they got a book published, right? And I just put that book on the shelf and I feel good about it. Well, the thing is though, I've actually read these books and a lot of others, and when you read these books, there's an interesting sleight of hand that Owen's alluded to that we're going to outline on the next slide.
So you take the fact that there was a historical figure named Pilate in first century Palestine.
Right.
You take the idea that the Romans really did crucify a lot of people. You take the idea that there were rabbinical type teachers in first century Palestine who would be sort of traveling rabbis.
Moral teachers or
And teach
apocalyptic.
moral things, right? The apocalyptic movement. We know that as mundane things, those are all true, that these kinds of things were happening. We have history that documents that. Christians will then say, we know that these elements of the story are true. That makes all elements of the story
Therefore, the
true.
Bible is reliable.
Right, therefore the Bible is reliable.
Therefore, we can believe these
As
supernatural.
eyewitness testimony of Jesus getting up and walking away from a grave.
And the reason I call this a sleight of hand is because especially somebody like Strobel, if you read what he does, he talks to some expert that provides some archaeological or textual evidence for these mundane things, and then says, okay, so the Bible's reliable, let's believe that Jesus was the unique Son of God. Not just that he existed, or that he was born of a virgin, or that he was a miracle worker, raised from the dead. You can see that this second list is a very different type of claim, and there's no evidence for these claims, except for establishing some truth on the first list.
Right.
All right.
But the Bible is divinely inspired. It's a perfect book.
No, it's obviously man-made.
Okay. What would we expect to look at if the Bible were a special book? We would expect it to be different from other ancient texts. Heck, we would expect it to be different from modern texts.
But instead we find that the Bible is profoundly similar to many other ancient texts and reflects its time and culture, both mythically and morally. And by mythically, I mean, it's by no means unique in its account of a virgin birth or a rising God or miracles. These are the sorts of stories that people in the first century believed.
A human that walked around that was the son of an actual deity. Anybody know how many children Zeus had if you consider the whole pantheon?
I'm going to say 0. Oh, no.
So if you go look it up on Wikipedia, there are something like 30 children.
So Yahweh wasn't even keeping up.
Right, Yahweh was a real slouch.
Mary's Me Too moment.
Right.
Okay, so, and morally as well, right? So morally, the Bible is, bankrupt by even our modern standards, which aren't that great most of the time. Okay, so the authorship of the Bible is mostly unknown or clearly falsely attributed, and it reflects a great deal of diversity in the early church.
Anybody know how many books there are in the New Testament? If you don't know, it's okay.
27.
27. Okay.
27.
Who was the author of the 7 that we know for sure? Paul.
Paul.
Well, the 7 undisputed letters of Paul.
But outside of
Outside
Galatians,
of those-
Romans, 1 Thessalonians, 1 and 2 Corinthians, outside of those, Philippians and Philemon, those 7 we know Paul wrote, or the best evidence suggests Paul wrote. But the other 20 books, every one of them is either falsely attributed, or in fact a forgery, or in fact anonymous. If you look at a book like Hebrews, it's anonymous. If you look at a book like Timothy, it's obviously forgery in the name of Paul.
Right.
If you look at a book like Matthew, it's clearly falsely attributed to a man who would have been long dead.
And the 4 gospel accounts, and this is an important thing, if you didn't know this, it's something that is interesting to know. Of the 4 gospel accounts we have, every single one of them is anonymous. And none of them claims to be an eyewitness account. It's just a story being.
And those names, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, don't really surface until over 100 years later, at the end of the 2nd century. People start putting names on them because they need authority.
Right.
Okay,
So,
what else about the Bible? Well,
New Testament books were written decades after the events they narrate, particularly when we look at the 4 Gospels. The earliest of the Gospels is Mark, and that's written as much as 40 years after Jesus would have been crucified. And if you look at Matthew and Luke copying from the Markan tradition and embellishing, and then we look at the later, there's some question about whether Luke Acts would have followed John's Gospel. I'm willing to let the scholars debate that.
so this point about the evolution of the myth over time, I want to give just one example here of the identity of Jesus, right? If you look at Mark, as Owen points out, the earliest gospel written, you've got Jesus walking around talking about a coming Messiah. He doesn't typically identify as himself. He doesn't claim to be God. He doesn't even claim to be the Messiah. Flash forward to Matthew, maybe a decade later, and Jesus is still not claiming to be God, but he's claiming to be the Messiah, clearly. And then flash forward to John, maybe a decade or 2 after that, and you've got Jesus walking around claiming to be co-equal
The
with God.
Father and I are one.
Right, and so even just the identity of Jesus has changed dramatically in 3 or 4 decades.
Okay, so think chain of custody. The compilation of what the New Testament canon is didn't actually come out until
It wasn't even suggested until
Yeah.
the late 4th century.
Right.
So for the first almost 300 years of Christianity, you've got lots of different communities using lots of different books. And so when a Protestant today will tell you that the Bible is the infallible Word of God, it was almost 400 years after the birth of Jesus before there was even any proposed agreement on what contents there are that are going to make up the New Testament. And there were lots of other Gospels, lots of other epistles, lots of other apocalypses that were thrown out to give us these 27. And so, again, our point here isn't even that any of these things are true or not. Our point is does this at all look like what a divine process would look like? This is a sloppy human process, exactly what you would expect in a mostly illiterate ancient world with no communication systems, no printing presses. And so
No internet,
it
no
was just
Snopes.
a long, sloppy human process, right, that got us there. And then that final compilation of what's included was based on theological wins and losses, right? The Gnostics had lost, the Orthodox had won. The view of Jesus as co-equal with God had won. And so they're pitching out stuff that doesn't match, their theological conclusions of the time.
Marcionism is out, Docetism is out, that these are debates that had to ultimately be resolved at Nicaea.
Well, and it's funny too, because the same Christians who will tell us, like if we're talking about something like creation, they'll say, oh, well, look at the perfect complexity and predictability of something like physics or DNA or spiraling galaxies, and they say this is just clear proof of design, right? This is evidence for divine creation. And I'm like, okay, fine, maybe that's a good argument, I don't know. But then they look at this process, which is just so completely haphazard and sloppy and they'll say, oh, well, God was working this as well. Like, you know, your God that can construct these spiraling galaxies and these complex DNA spirals, you would think could have managed his most important message for humanity a little bit less sloppy.
And we have no original documents. We have nothing but manuscripts that are
Copies of copies of copies, and none of them agree.
And none of them agree. Bart Ehrman likes to point out that there are as many variations among the 30,000 extant New Testament manuscripts as there are words in the New Testament. And
Well,
he's-
more errors than words.
Right, so whether that's literally true or not, the point is actually pretty clear. If this were a divine, special, perfect book, we would expect the chain of custody to be a lot clearer than it is. To Rex's point, this actually looks like a very human process, not a divine, perfect process. So, claim number 3. Does this look beautiful to you, this picture?
Well, let me pause here for a second too, because what we're talking about here is we're really moving in these claims to the left in terms of Christian denominations. The most fundamentalist Christians talk about the myth and the miracle, they talk about the inspiration of the Bible. You start talking to Methodists and Presbyterians, they're not so much talking about the miracle in the Bible, but they will still make these kinds of claims. Oh, it's so beautiful, we love the plan. Almost like with a wink that we don't care if it's really true or not, we just love it.
Yeah.
And
For
so,
God so loved the world.
and they will tell you this image is the greatest moment of love in the history of humanity, right? They'll tell you this, and it's really just awful. I think that's the Mel Gibson Jesus.
In the scholarly community, the death story, they call this the passion story, right? The passion narrative. And that they call it the passion. It's an interesting word choice. They're trying to describe the passion of Jesus for enduring all of this because he loves the world, right? That's the idea. So here's a question for you. If you were the deity of the entire universe, why would you require a human sacrifice in order to forgive the sins of the world? Seriously.
Just forgive if you want to forgive.
Like, if I could think of it, right, when Rex and I agreed to get together and work on a project, or, we're building a presentation or something, and Rex sends me a text message like, hey man, I'm running late, I'll be there half an hour late. Okay, that's fine, I'm sitting there working, no big deal. I say, hey man, no worries, it's all good. You don't even need to apologize, it's forgiven, don't worry about it, I'll see you when you get here, okay? If a human being can forgive, why can't a deity forgive? Without Rex, I need you to sacrifice one of your kids.
Because there's no control in that. All right. All right.
You get the point. There's nothing beautiful about this. It's only beautiful because you're trying to make excuses for it.
All right. Here's my favorite part. Okay, so this is my favorite part of the presentation because Owen is going to do his best Richard Dawkins impersonation that he's been practicing, and he's done it a couple of times now. You're like the third group we've given this to, so Owen's had some practice.
So the premise we stake out here is that the Christian God is actually a bad guy. He's an awful, evil guy, and no one has really ever said this better than Richard Dawkins.
Right. So rather than us try to explain it, let's go back to Dr. Dawkins, who's already said it as well as it needs to be said.
And with as much love and respect for the good professor as I could possibly muster, here we are. The goal of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully. Someday, if I ever hit the big time, maybe Professor Dawkins will stand up and say, I can do it better. So, would you want that guy? The God of the Old Testament, would you want that guy as your neighbor? Seriously, no. No.
And this is really what you were talking about before, right? The whole plan for humanity and salvation is a bad plan, right? You build these angels and then they're so flawed they rebel. Then you build these humans and they're so flawed they rebel. And then you got to become yourself and your son and die so that you can forgive. But even then you don't forgive because they have to know it and claim it. And like it's a terrible plan.
Two naked people in a garden were persuaded by a talking snake to eat the wrong magical fruit. And so Jesus.
Right.
Like, seriously, that's the plan. And the more fundamentalist you are, the more literal you think that's true.
It's a bad plan.
That's a bad plan. So, has it worked?
Has it worked? No, this is the North Texas Church of Freethought right here in hell.
Tim is one of the upside down people there, I'm not sure.
Roasting cauldron.
Right.
No, but the question is, has this worked? Look at this. I mean, we're 2,000 years into this movie, and you've got about a third of the world and dropping that's Christian. So the whole idea that this is going to be the final answer and we're going to get it to everybody, given thousands of years in mass media, we're not even winning that. So again, a bad plan. I think a Madison Avenue marketing firm would have had brand Christianity a little bit better off at this point.
And that 34% right there, I don't know if y'all can read our pipes, that 34%, that includes Mormons, and everybody knows they are not Christian. Sorry, a little bit of humor, everybody laugh.
All right.
Morality in the Bible. When we look at the Bible, and Christians tell us that God's plans are just, and it's beautiful, and
Family values,
the moral, family values, right? So when we look at the Bible, what do we see?
slavery, and not just in the Old Testament. In the New.
Right? And how many people know that the book of Philemon is actually the Apostle Paul, authentic Paul, by the way, returning a runaway slave? How many of you knew that?
Right, of course.
That's New Testament.
So slavery is promoted in the Old Testament and permitted in the New Testament, and Jesus never condemns it, and it doesn't even make the Ten Commandments. Subjugation of women. Women are basically property. You know, if you read, even in the Ten Commandments, it says, don't covet your neighbor's house or his wife or his ox, right? So like the wife is property right there between the house and the ox, in terms of what you shouldn't covet, which is a silly idea anyway. The murder of children, it happens constantly, not just that God orders it, but God does it himself over and over again. Genocide. The whole idea of a chosen people, you know, if you look at planet Earth, and here's this little strip on the eastern side of the Mediterranean, and this is God's chosen people, that's an offensive, racist, tribal idea. Sickness as punishment, I think Tim was talking about this earlier. Human sacrifice, the Ten Commandments, certainly not perfect morality. And then just the capricious, extreme punishments. You know, my relationship with my civil government has a wide range of punishment, right? Like if I'm late with a library book, I owe 15 cents. And if I commit premeditated murder, I can have my life taken. The range of penalties from 15 cents to capital punishment is because humans have come up with, you know, punishments that fit the crime. Doesn't mean we've always gotten that perfectly. But for God, every little sin is a death penalty, right? There's nothing balanced about it. This guy's unhinged.
And it's infinite, right? The finite crime of thinking the wrong thing for, let's say, the 80 years that you live, okay? The finite crime of having been wrong.
If you look at Owen and have lust in your heart, you know, then you're going to suffer for all eternity.
It happens to be a
Right.
crazy religion.
I'm not guilty of that sin.
Right. But for that sin, right, when you go to hell, you're going to suffer eternally for that. Your torment will never end. And that, anyway.
Which isn't even really biblical in itself.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I don't believe it.
All right. So here's the
Humanity's
fourth
good for
point.
humanity.
Right. And again, think as we're moving to the left, you'll find Episcopalians and disciples of Christ that really don't believe any of that other stuff we've talked about, that'll still tell us things like this. We got to keep playing church because it's good for humanity. And we say no. It's an extreme obstacle to human flourishing.
This is,
You're going to hear Owen preach now.
right, this is the best bullet point that we talk about, and we're going to go into a lot of detail here. If I can.
So give me some examples.
Okay, so first things first, everybody agrees that the bad stuff is bad. I'm not going to ask any Christian to defend the raping of little children.
Or
Like,
flying
it's-
airplanes into
or flying
buildings, or the
airplanes.
witch trials, Inquisition.
And I'm saying this not ironically. I'm not going to ask anybody to defend the Westboro Baptist Church. I'm not talking.
Picketing veterans' funerals and
Right.
stuff. So the bad stuff is bad, but what we're talking about next,
What we're talking about is that the safest, happiest, nicest, my grandmother's version of Christianity in a little country church with little ladies who would never hurt a fly and never have,
this is killing.
still believe things that are killing
Oh,
us.
look how happy these people are.
They are happier than our audience.
Your audience,
That they are certainly more engaged.
they're washed in the blood.
Than our audience is.
Right.
I don't know. They're watching something.
Okay.
Okay. So, first argument that we have is that Christianity distorts and devalues critical thinking.
Well, and you know, really, we joked about some stuff earlier about stoning kids and some of the stuff in the Old Testament, and nobody really follows that, even though they say that it's the Word of God. But this is not a small point, right? That this this idea that they're teaching children to lean not on your own understanding. If you can drive 5 miles in any direction on this Sunday morning and find churches teaching some version of this right now to the children. This is the message to children. Don't trust your own insight. Don't trust your own understanding. Don't trust your own mind. Submit to Jesus, submit to the church, submit to the authority. And imagine being told this for 18 years. Don't trust your own understanding. And Owen and I both think this is just poison.
That is.
I was taught this as a child.
Let's do.
But the truth is, you need to trust your own understanding. You need to hone your own understanding, your own knowledge, your own logic, your own ability to reason and discern. That's the message that we need to give children. This is not just wrong, this is damnable. And this is just the start.
That is venom in the minds of children. And imagine the outcome of a diet of that for an entire childhood or an entire life. Do not try to solve your own problems. Do not rely on your own intuition and your own moral
You
conscience.
can't and you shouldn't. And how many of you
can't
were
and you
taught this
shouldn't.
as children? Did you get this, the message as children? Yeah. And what are we told about Proverbs? This is the wisdom, right? This is the wisdom of the ages. Tells you not to use your own brain. The most evolved organ in the galaxy. Hopefully.
Right. So Christianity distorts scientific advancement, education, and understanding. So this is, everybody familiar with the Creation Museum?
This is the Ken Ham. You know Ken Ham?
Right. But so we're going to layer on top of don't trust your own intuition, lean not into your own
So
understanding.
who should you trust?
Who should you trust? The answer is you should trust people that think that humans used to ride dinosaurs.
Yeah. So this is an actual biology textbook used by high school students who homeschool in Christian homes, and it teaches them the literal Genesis account of that the earth is 6,000 years old, and that dinosaurs and people coexisted before the flood, and that the fossil evidence and the geological evidence and the historical evidence is a vast conspiracy against Christianity, and that they shouldn't even read the books from the other side because that's how Satan gets in your brain.
Right.
That's what's in that textbook. And there are people walking around with high school diplomas that learned their biology from that textbook, and a lot of them.
We live in Texas, we're in a pretty red state. There are people with college degrees and even graduate degrees walking around in this city, even in Irving, who believe that, with graduate degrees, who believe that the world is less than 10,000 years old. And they will not hear counter, and they refuse to listen to reason. That's terrifying. And that Christianity is doing that to us. Christianity is a profound resource waste. And this is an easy one. If you go look at a church, you go look at the First Dallas Baptist downtown, right? That the waste of resources associated with building this great big Six Flags Over Jesus, Prestonwood Baptist Church in North Dallas, that is a ridiculous, galactically bad use of resources.
And has been for centuries.
For centuries.
It's really our point here. I mean, Owen likes to say we went on the moon in the 1500s. If it
Right.
wasn't for religion.
Look at
Right.
right. If you've ever traveled to Europe and seen some of these ancient cathedrals, imagine that entire cities, entire villages of people spent their entire lives in order to build a cathedral that took 180 years to finish. So 3 generations of people spent their entire lives to build it. And imagine what they could have done for their own communities had they done something that wasn't to build this great big edifice to a non-existent God.
Well, and think about how many of these mission trips that, supposedly going to third world countries in South America or in Africa, and really the goal is to bring them Bibles and to preach to them, right? And
Right.
we may build some token well and then leave, but really it's about spreading the religion, which has been terrible as well.
And the thing that pisses me off is that Christians will tell you, well, nobody else would build hospitals if it weren't for Christians. That's foolish.
Right.
All right, Christianity distorts morality. I love this.
So you all know this story, right? So the snake is talking to Eve, and I think when we all learned this as a child, we thought, the snake's the bad guy, and Eve was making a mistake to listen to the snake. But if you really listen to what the snake had to say to Eve, the snake, which is not identified as Satan, by the way, when you listen to what the snake had to say to Eve, it's actually pretty good advice, right? The serpent said to the woman, "You surely will not die, for God knows that in the day you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." Like, isn't that what we want? Don't we want the ability to discern good and evil? Don't we want our eyes to be open? And what's the alternative that God is offering, right? I'm going to tell you what's right and wrong. Don't think for yourself. And so it's a little bit of an inversion, but Owen and I would encourage you to think of the serpent as the real hero of this story, right? He's the one saying, psst, you don't have to listen to that guy.
Think for yourself, be your own moral agent, make your own decisions. You are responsible for the outcomes of your actions. You are the person who is causing harm or causing a benefit to the world, and you have to own that. The snake is the hero of the story.
And really that is, to me, that is the essence of humanism. And I know in conversations with a number of you, most of you identify as humanists or some form of secular humanist. To me, humanism is we're going to use our human intellect to solve moral problems, right? We're not going to rely on an ancient text. We're not going to rely on an invisible deity. We're going to do the hard work. That doesn't mean the answer is always easy, and it doesn't mean we're always going to agree. It just means that we know the burden is on us to do the work. This is what the snake's saying, right? The burden of discerning good and evil is on you. Use your reason, open your eyes, use your intellect, and I think that's the right answer.
I agree. Christianity grossly distorts sexual ethics. So is that your purity ring?
I think that was your purity.
Okay.
No, but if you think about the way through the centuries, humanity has, Christianity specifically, and lots of other religions too, has denigrated women to the level of property. Women were much later in getting any kind of civil rights, and religion was always the enemy of that. Obviously, homosexuals and LGBT people have been demonized for centuries. And so this idea that there's this ancient text that tells us the answers about this has distorted every conversation on this subject, on really things that should have been private matters.
And in the 21st century, this is still a problem today. Public schools are challenged in providing sex education to kids. That causes real harmful outcomes in the world.
Multi-generational poverty.
Multi-generational damage that we know how to prevent pregnancy and we know how to prevent STDs, but we cannot have honest conversations with our kids and teach them about that because there is this puritanical drive to put this subject in a box.
Well, and LGBT youth have something like 10 times higher suicide rates than straight kids.
Right.
And that's not because being gay is making you kill yourself. It's because the public response to being gay is making you kill yourself.
If the effect that this has on children doesn't piss you off, then I'm not doing a good enough job explaining how it should.
Okay.
Okay. Christianity distorts our view of justice. Rex and I participate in a number of forums, both in person and online, and in a recent experience in an online forum, I got into an argument with some apologists about this idea of social justice. And they argue that Christian justice shouldn't be affected by history, that justice is universal, and that the Christian understanding is the right understanding. When I point out that the Christian understanding of justice has really varied over time, that Christian justice used to include things like burning people at the stake and the Inquisition. All I got was pushback. I know what you're talking about. That wasn't really Christianity.
Well,
my understanding is real Christianity.
And not even varies over time, and it varies now between denominations, right? That all look at the same book and come to radically different conclusions.
The fact that, so I said I would not ask people to defend the Westboro Baptist Church, but it is a telling example that on the one hand, you have the Westboro Baptist Church looking at the same document and concluding they understand what justice is, and you have other people who walk around who are progressive liberal voters who think that Jesus was the original social justice warrior. And they're both looking at the same source material.
So when I put this slide together, the thing I'm thinking of is the idea that if there's someone falsely imprisoned, in an example like that, there are Christians who will say, well, if we can't solve this, it's not the end of the world because Jesus is going to return and dry every eye, or this life doesn't really matter because all that matters is to focus on your eternity in heaven and the afterlife. And if that's not true, if there is no afterlife, if there is no returning Jesus to solve our problems, then we have to solve the problems. We have to work for justice now because there's no one coming. One of the messages I think that a group like this could embrace and should embrace is the idea that we're alone, that we're on this little blue marble and there's nobody out there that's gonna come. Anything we're gonna do to solve our problems, we've got to do. And then even like a justice issue, not just in the criminal context, but you know, the fact that there are children with nothing to eat right now or in desperate need of medicine. Christians will say, we're not going to fix that problem. This is Satan's world, but Jesus is going to come fix that problem. But if you take Christianity out of the equation, then it's our job to feed those children. It's our job to get them medicine, and that matters. This worldview that de-emphasizes the value of this life has real consequences.
Also, Christianity makes a virtue of faith. We said we were going to talk about the McCain funeral. Let's talk about what faith is. You go to Hebrews. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. In no other aspect of our lives are we taught to glorify this idea that completely invisible make-believe stuff makes you a good moral human being.
So this is not just the definition that Christians will give you, that it is in fact evidence of things not seen. It is essentially evidence where there is no evidence. But they then turn that nonsense, that is nonsense, and they turn it into a virtue, right? If you are a person of faith, then you are a virtuous person. What are we saying? I'm a person who believes things without sufficient evidence. That makes me virtuous. Well, no. And in no other discipline would that be virtuous. Not in business, not in law, not in medicine, not in science. You know, imagine going to a scientific conference and saying, well, I don't have any evidence, but I believe this strongly without evidence, and that makes me virtuous. Well, no, of course not. That's nonsense. And Christianity not only does this, but then it creates a culture where you can't assail this idea.
Right. Exactly right. Imagine, let's do a substitution. Let's substitute faith in Jesus for faith that Elvis still is alive somewhere. Okay? If I stood up in front of a room full of people and said, you should vote for me to send me to Congress.
I'm a person of strong faith.
Because I'm a person of strong faith that Elvis is still out there.
Do you have any evidence of that?
That's
My faith is the evidence.
That is ridiculous. That's absurd. It's laughable. And yet in the context of religion, we are not only taught from early childhood that faith is a virtue, but we're also taught that it's not right, it's not appropriate. Religious faith in this sense is something that's beyond question. You are a bad person for challenging somebody's faith. Shame on you for not allowing somebody to have the faith of their own conscience. And you know what I say to that?
Silly idea.
I say, Rexy's in my house, but I say bullshit. One of the reasons that we cannot have honest conversations with the Muslim world right now, one of the reasons we cannot sit down with the Muslim community in the world and talk about why we reject their...
It's an ancient made-up religion.
It's an ancient
your book is man-made.
Because we can't be honest with ourselves that our own tradition is fake and made up.
Right. We aren't willing to turn that mirror on ourselves,
Right.
so we're always going to have a problem there.
Right.
Okay, here's what I want to talk about the funeral. Christianity stunts our emotional maturity. And if you go to a funeral and the audience is in denial and say, you know, we love this person and now they're gone, but don't worry, he's still alive, he's still watching us, he's in a better place, or, you know, after some tragedy, we'll hear you're in my thoughts and prayers. What's the alternative to this? What's the alternative to this emotional immaturity? The alternative is to do the hard work, right? Like, we got to hold each other, we got to grieve, and we got to get through this. And telling ourselves lies in our hardest moments is a coping mechanism, but it's not letting us grow up as a species. And so when I saw the memorial service yesterday, and whether you saw it or not, you can imagine the scene. We're in this Grand National Cathedral in Washington, and there's a wooden box up front with Senator McCain, you know, sealed in the box, and you've got, you know, President Obama, President Bush, you know, several of the Senate colleagues, even some of McCain's own family, his daughter. And throughout all these speeches, there are, you know, obviously jabs at the current administration. There are comments about foreign policy. There are comments about his thought on the military. There are comments on, you know, domestic policies that he would have been involved in the Senate. And all of that is fine and appropriate in remembering a man like that. But it's also peppered with these comments by pretty much all of the speakers at different points. Oh, well, I know that he's looking down on us now, or I know he's getting a laugh out of this, or I know he's in a better place, or I know he's back with his father. You know, these sorts of outrageous supernatural claims peppered throughout an otherwise reasonable remembrance of a man that had a great life. And so I'm watching this, and then I have on the 24-hour news afterwards where they're, dissecting every part of the service. And I was on MSNBC, but I'm sure if you switched around, you'd find similar commentary. And, the talking heads are digging into, parsing out exact sentences. Well, was this a comment about Trump, the Make America Great Again part? And was this, is this correct? And what do you think about this foreign policy thing? Like, they're dissecting the minutiae word by word of these speeches. And I listened to 3 hours of this, and not once does anyone say, oh wait, what about that thing about he's still alive? Like, doesn't that deserve as much attention as whatever you thought about foreign policy? Like, it's absurd to me how these kinds of statements can just be peppered in, and we would do that level of dissection of every other statement, but this is off limits, right? It's that faith thing, right? It's completely off limits, so nobody's going to say, I wanted them to say, well, here's 2 experts on foreign policy to talk about that comment, and coming up after the break, here's an atheist and a preacher to talk about this, and the atheist says, well, wait a second, the man's dead in a box, what is this about he's with his father? Oh, well, this is true. Well, where's your evidence for that? Oh, I've got this old book. Well, why should we believe that? Like that's the kind of dialogue we ought to be having about those statements, just like we are about any other statement, but of course we don't, that's off limits.
Right.
I also don't know how much the people actually believe it. I think if we could have Barack Obama sitting here and he would be honest with us, I don't think this man actually believes that you have a conscious survival after you're dead. I think it's just such a part of our social fabric that you just have to say these things to the point of absurdity. This is why the aliens aren't coming and bringing us the good stuff, because they're waiting on us to get over this. Okay.
I think he's kidding about the aliens, but I don't know. All right, Christianity grossly distorts desperately needed long-term planning. We touched on this earlier on the justice side. There are problems that this planet faces, and if we throw our hands up in the air and say we are not going to lean on our own understanding, we're just going to say prayers.
Well, and here's the
We're
prayer,
going to wait
right?
for Jesus to come fight our battles for us.
This is what Jesus said to pray. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, in earth as it is in heaven, right? This is the answer. If that ice cap is melting, or these kids are hungry, or this moron is still in public office, if this is the case, are we going to fix these problems, or are we going to wait for Jesus to come fix these problems? We're getting the gong. I don't know if it was on Paul Ryan or the overtime, but
Well, I'm
either
just
way.
going to say, this relates directly to how we started out. It may not be a violation of the law that these people run around endorsing these religious idiocies.
Right.
But you got a guy right there who's at that funeral, who's making public policy decisions
Right.
on the basis of the belief that this life is just a little flash.
Just
in the
a dry
pan,
run.
And that what really matters is eternity.
Right.
And
Right.
these are people that are making really seriously decisions about public health,
Right.
And
medical
cancer's
research.
getting worse.
And like you say, whether or not global warming is something we should, even if we're not gonna reverse it, that we should do something to remediate.
But you know
That's
what?
that's the violation of a far more profound level than a technical, legal, they're not interfering with our right to believe
Absolutely.
differently.
And if we elect these people into the highest office where they're really supposed to be working to solve our problems, and what does he really think the answer is? Does he really think we need to worry about those ice caps or those hungry
I
kids?
think he thinks the answer is behind him in the picture.
Right, this is the answer,
Yeah.
right? And if we just gotta hold on a little bit longer because Jesus is gonna come back, or the terrible squalid lives that these kids are gonna have won't really matter because then they'll be in heaven for an eternity if we'll just give them a Bible. And so the idea that this is grossly distorting the long-term planning, these ideas are poison. We need to all realize we are alone. And if we're gonna fix these problems, we're gonna have to fix these problems.
And
That's the point.
The exact negation of this is the secular humanist position that says we, the human beings of the planet, are responsible for caring for each other. And I love what Barack Obama said, there is a fierce urgency of now. Right now, these problems are happening. The ice caps are melting, sea levels are rising,
And yet
children
turn on-
are hungry,
turn on the
there
news
is
and-
pervasive disease in the world that is absolutely preventable.
And what are
And
we
prayers
arguing
aren't
about?
gonna solve the problem.
Right.
He said I was gonna preach it.
There you go, and it gets better.
It gets better. All right, Christianity devalues this life. This goes back to something Rex told a bit earlier. For centuries, Christians have been told, accept your lot in life. Accept where you are. Your current circumstances are irrelevant. Give no thought to tomorrow, that Jesus is going to come again. Your eternity is what matters to you, not your present. And so for 2,000 Christian years, for 20 Christian centuries, we have been telling the poor and the downtrodden and the oppressed and the minorities and the women, accept your place, know your place, stay in your place, don't improve yourself, lean not unto your own understanding. Your current life, your current relationships are not the things that are important. Look to your heavenly reward later. And what happened? For 2,000 years, Christianity has kept people oppressed.
Right.
Christianity devalues this life.
And
This life.
there's no rapture, and there's no pearly gates, and this is the only life you're ever gonna have. And that's a much more empowering message than don't worry about it.
The fierce urgency of now.
All right?
Okay, Christianity is poison to the minds of John. I'm getting.
Do y'all know this movie, Jesus Camp? Have you seen this? Yeah. If you don't know Jesus Camp, please go watch it. I think it's on Netflix or Apple TV. What is the message? And we're not making this up. I would invite any of you to go visit the Sunday school classes for the children. This is the message. You are weak, in need of a redeemer. That is repeated for 18 years to the children. You are flawed, in need of a savior. And not only that, you were born flawed. You are hunted by Satan and his demons. You will hear this in the most fundamentalist places. The wrong movie, the wrong book, the wrong rock and roll will put the demons in your head. Your mind is an open book to supernatural beings. They can read your thoughts. You are powerless without Jesus in your heart. There are songs that teach the children this over and over again. All of your personal relationships are less important than your relationship with God. These are toxic ideas. These are terrible ideas. These are wrong ideas. And yet this is the thrust of youth education in the Christian church.
This is brain cyanide, and this is the message to children, and it should piss you off.
What's the alternative, Owen?
The alternative is to teach children that they are empowered.
Here it is. So the last thing that the most liberal Christians will tell us in defending their faith is that life without Christianity would be meaningless and hopeless. And we want to, in the last couple of minutes we're standing here, paint you an alternative picture. And that is basically that a life of reason and free thought can be meaningful and beautiful.
And we hope you're an easy sell because you're already free thinkers.
Well, and there's a reason we keep showing you children, because this is the battleground, right? Like, you know, I'm glad somebody's asking the over 70 crowd about their thoughts on the afterlife. This is what's going to matter, you know, if we're really going to solve those problems.
Rex asked about the alternative. The alternative is empowerment.
Right.
And hope comes from empowerment.
So think about that list I just showed you. You're weak, you're flawed, you need a savior, you need a redeemer. What is the alternative? I want to spend 18 years teaching this child. You are the most evolved species in the galaxy. You have the DNA of Newton and Rembrandt and Curry and Einstein flowing through your veins. You are creative, you are a problem solver. You have the ability to cooperate and communicate in a global sense in a way the world never has. Put down the weapons, put down the bigotry, put down the religion, unite, link arms, solve these problems, cooperate, work together. Imagine a diet of that for 18 years, and imagine how opposite that is from your flawed and you're weak and don't trust your own understanding. I want to tell this child and all of the children in her generation, lean on your own understanding and sharpen your own understanding and communicate it and embrace peace. That's the answer, is empowerment.
Yes, we can.
You have the tools.
Meaning. So let's talk about meaning in life. One of the frequent arguments that we get from the apologist crowd is that without Christianity, without some sort of objective idea that transcends you, that life cannot have meaning. And I say, like I say on a couple of things here, bullshit. That's absolutely not true.
Well,
My life absolutely has value.
Well, if the Christians mean by this that it has no external meaning, I would tend to agree, right? I think that there's no invisible God pushing meaning onto our lives. But that doesn't mean we can't make meaning. You know, we have friendship, we have art, we have nature, we have travel, music, love, sex, good wine, family, food, learning, whatever else you want to add to the list. The idea is you create meaning for your life. You decide what's important and what motivates you. You know, a balance of contribution and enjoyment.
Rex clearly made this slide because there's no beer, cigars, or airplanes.
Well, there you go. Owen wants cigars and airplanes, but he's making his own meaning.
Right. So, one of the last slides we're going to give you, we can create a paradise on earth if everything Rex said, the message that we should be giving to children is true. We are extremely capable, we are empowered, if we work together, we can accomplish amazing, extraordinary things. And here's the catch, we have to, because nobody's coming to solve
Nobody's
these
coming to
problems
do
for
it
us.
for us.
Right? We can feed the world, we can cure disease, we can continue to make grand technological
We
and
can stop killing
advances.
each other.
We can stop killing each other, right? We can end wars. These are things that are within our power to do. We have to set down tribalism. We have to set down the inclusion and exclusion, the things that divide us, and we have to set down the supernatural, non-evidence-based thinking that has infected our brains since the dawn of man.
Right. And obviously, we're framing this as the claims of Christianity, because that's the tradition we both came out of. But you could certainly apply this to any of the other world religions. And we want former members of those religions delivering this same message back to them.
Okay, so we're back to the spectrum. The more fundamentalist you are, the higher you're gonna be. When you ask why you are a Christian,
Yeah.
Pentecostal or Seventh-day Adventist,
This is not a perfect correlation, but this basically, is our experience from spending several years talking to all of these people, what you're gonna hear from those. And the reason we pause here at the end is that if you have any activist tendencies the way Owen and I do, and you want to engage Christians, the real point is you need to understand where they are on the spectrum. If you're talking to an Episcopalian and you start, saying, oh, the Bible's not real, they're probably going to agree with you, right? Or if you start talking about a Pentecostal or to a Pentecostal or Baptist about, oh, well, life can be meaningful without religion, they don't care. They're still up here. So you've got to sort of match your response to where they are. There are good answers to all of these things, obviously, but know your audience, I guess is my only point here.
and the only other thing I would say is Rex and I are, maybe the only people who are really out talking about this a lot right now, but we are advocates for free thought. We are advocates for evangelizing the idea of atheism and the idea of free thought. I'm okay being ecumenical, and I'm happy to have friends who are Christians, and that's okay. But I think the world would be a better place with less Christianity in it. I think the world would be a better place with less religion in it. But to Rex's point, I'm not a former Muslim or Hindu. I'm a former Christian, so that's where I'm going to focus.
Well, and part of breaking the ice on that conversation is just being willing to have that conversation. We've got to drop the taboo on talking about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Questions?
Let me ask you something. Have you ever asked a Christian how they interpret, for instance, the Ten Commandments and what they think about it, where it says to have no other gods before you? It seems to me at that time there is definitely a belief that there's other gods. But I think
Absolutely.
they never hear that.
Right. No, and in fact, there are lots of instances in the first 5 books of the Bible to suggest that the ancient Jews didn't start out monotheistic. When they talk about Baal and when they talk about the gods of the Philistines, it's not that they're denying them, it's that they say Yahweh is more powerful, right? Our God can beat up your God, not your God doesn't exist. That came much later. So monotheism was an evolving part of that religion.
There's another question right here.
One of those, few slides back, you showed a couple scenes there, and I was just wondering what those were. Just some artistic rendering?
Yeah, just
Oh,
some
yeah.
artistic rendering of a future world.
Really all that was.
Something with a lot of green and people not killing each other.
Yes, ma'am.
They found artifacts in Göbekli Tepe that they're in southeastern Turkey that belong to 12,000 years old. And it's religious sites. And I hear that Catholic Church does not want that to come out. Because it defies their claim that humanity is like 6,000 years old, 10,000 years old.
So there are certainly Christians that oppose.
The religion goes back
Right.
at least 12,000 years.
Right. Well, I mean, obviously the Mayans were here long before the flood. Aboriginal Australians were over there long before the flood. No, I don't think you so much get that from Catholics anymore. I think the state of the art of Catholicism is accepting evolution and old Earth, and they just think that the soul arrived at some point. But certainly for more fundamentalist Protestants, they would just, when you say we've got archaeological evidence of this civilization that predated your Adam and Eve story, they would say, you've got bad science on the dating, right? If you're using carbon dating, or if you're using layers of geology, they just deny that science and say, no, there is a civilization there, but it's from after the flood or from before the flood, but they're gonna shoehorn it in within the last 6,000 years.
Yes, sir.
Get this a lot. How do you respond to, when you're talking to a Christian and you give them this information, similar to what you had, and they'll just stop and say, well, Jesus Christ is my Savior, and that's it? I'm not listening.
Well, if you don't want to have a conversation about it, then I can't change your mind. But I would follow that up with, tell me why you think Jesus is your Savior. And it's gonna be one of these five.
Try to ask questions. And you know, the thing is, I don't ever expect in engaging a Christian that they're gonna drop their religion in that moment, in that conversation. But you start planting seeds, right? And if we're talking about the most fundamentalists, where it's really based on the Bible, just start planting the seeds. You know, Jesus didn't even die on the same day between the two Gospels. Like, there's clearly contradictions in the New Testament. Planting seeds like that, if they're a person who's going to, you know, think about that and come back to that, people may come back to you a year later and say, you know what, it was something you said that made me start my journey away from it.
And you never know, right? Every time you have this conversation, you are the face of atheism to the person that you're talking to. So you need to be aware of that, right? You need to be a good representative of atheism, not be an angry, yelling person. The other thing that you should keep in mind is you never know. You may never have another conversation with this person, but 3 years from now, that seed of cognitive dissonance that you planted in that person's mind might have germinated, and then they may let go of this faith tradition that they've held on to their entire lives, and that decision roots back to a 10-minute conversation you had with them standing in line at Kroger.
Or maybe, you know, one of the things I think about sometimes is it's the bystander, right? If I'm talking to some university, you know, Christian pastor that teaches at some Christian school, apologetics or whatever, and I'm having this debate with them, they're probably not the person that I'm going to change the mind. But if I'm in that proverbial grocery line or in an online forum with, you know, 200 people that aren't saying a word, you never know when it's a bystander who observes this conversation that has the seed planted that starts down that journey. So it's not even just the person I'm talking to, it's who's hearing this conversation.
And this, I'll call it a battle. I'm not at war with Christianity, I'm really not. But winning more nuns, which is the goal, is something that's going to happen one mind and one human at a time.
But no, you are at war with Christianity.
No, but
It's an interesting thing there because, you know, we've gone all over the spectrum, and we've talked about this at church many times, you know, the anger that an atheist can have against all this silly belief, you know, it's just, like you're saying, really, how can what are you talking about? But there's different approaches. You have to, like you were just saying, you have to meet people where they're at. Now, if you look at some of these Christian fundamentalists, how they present, like, for example, William Lane Craig, who's acknowledged, you know, God. He goes very much after this meaning and purpose, and God is perfect. And no matter how liberal the believers are, they're all going to be talking about, yeah, well, all the little details of the Bible, but when you die, you go to this great bliss and so on and so forth. Think about how Columbo, we talked about this too, we have had a talk, the three detectives' way of dealing with things. What would Columbo be like? Let me understand this. You know, he's got his trench coat on. I don't quite, there's still something I don't quite get here. If you're going to have all this wonderful, wonderful goodness and everything forever and ever and ever after you die, eventually when this earth is gone, why didn't God just make it that way to begin with?
Why didn't you start that way?
Well, because every time he does, it gets screwed up.
But that's a powerful doubt.
Well, the other thing I would say that claim about it gives my life meaning and I love it and it makes my heart happy and whatever, like those, if you really parse out what the person's saying, those might be persuasions to believe, but they aren't persuasions that it's true, right? Like this is why I like it. This isn't why I believe it. Those are two different things. If you're going to like it, I could say, oh, and when you die, you go to pie heaven, and you have all the pie you want every day. And you may say, that sounds great, I love pie. My wife doesn't let me eat carbs, so now I can have all the sugar. Right.
You pick pie for a reason.
But I just made up pie heaven, right? So no matter how much you like it, there's no evidence that it's true. And so this is the conversation.
I'm a man of great faith.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Owen and I have this conversation with the liberal Christians all the time. They throw out all the myth and magic, and yet they still cling to the parts they like. And I'm like, well, that's fine, but you have no reason to believe that, even though you like it. Yes?
Could I ask how you counter the position that you as an atheist have no reason to do anything kind or helpful, and me as a Christian have no reason without religion to be other than a predator?
Well,
I hear that all the time.
I'm gonna reach for a pesky thing called evidence. You know, I have no evidence that Christians behave more morally than non-believers, and I have lots of evidence that non-believers don't do some of the pernicious things that Christians do.
But you see, he's talking to motivation, in other words,
Well-
that kind of Christian can be responded to by saying, really, you mean, you'll only do something nice for somebody because that's your ticket to heaven?
Right, well, because we're social animals, and, you know, we're not, we get along better when we cooperate.
That's why it's good to have atheist quotes, like the one that Lincoln is attributed to Lincoln. When you do good, you feel good.
Right.
When you do bad, you feel bad.
Well, in most other mammal species that don't kill their own species, don't need any sort of ancient text to tell them, you know, chimpanzees don't kill each other, cats don't kill each
We
other.
see group altruism in other mammals.
Nowhere near as much as we kill each other.
Right, we see group altruism in other mammals. I would argue that this idea of group altruism is the underpinning of the modern sort of conscience. Pinker and lots of other people have talked about why we treat each other better and better over time, and how human behavior has really improved over time. In fact, both of his books, Steve Pinker's books, are fantastic. We haven't read them.
I just ordered it this morning.
It's fantastic. So, to Rex's point, all I would say to the Christian is, you don't understand why I wouldn't mistreat people, and yet, here we are.